After throning the Crescent Valley for 3 quanta, Lisa thought she had Calto figured out. Green summer magic is glorious, but not eternal. Cycles of lush vegetation eventually come to an end when the Lystrosaurus returned to the oxygen-rich caves. At first, Queen and King Roland thought they simply hibernated, but another dynamic transition suggests otherwise. Moist jungle desiccating into a kindling forest. Unbeknownst to the royals, a Byzantine network of underground tunnels allow their tusked subjects to remain active in reclusion. Grooming gloss from below, the subterranean gardeners are setting the silver for Calto's red carpet. Within a few short cycles, felled trees and autumnal confetti will litter the ground until all is ignited. The scorching purification is essential and makes Calto uninhabitable for a brief period. Healthy glossstock are resistant to the singeing flames, but the oxygen-enriched caves are not. Too large to follow into the catacombs, the Andrewsarchus must wait out the hellish season elsewhere. Luckily for the imperial pair, Lisa's misadventure down Calto's cascading pools uncovered a critical lifeline. The grotto hidden behind Brom's spiraled waterfall is actually a hatch. Rather than ending in a Lystro-sized mini-cave, it connects back to the steppe and functions as a rear entrance to Calto. A more discreet in and out in the meadow opening, Brom's hatch allows the royals to wait out the worst of Red's fury. In ashes, Calto plummets into white. The season is longer than Red, but still brief, and the Andrewsarchus are well adapted. With seasonal coats, they are sufficiently warm and can find food and shelter easily. Upturning blackened bushes, Roland spends his winter digging up oversized insects, while Lisa happily dozes in Calto's O2 caves. It is a bit of a snow globe existence, and for those needing the occasional hunt, Brom's hatch allows for easy passage back to the steppe, which does not share Calto's seasons. Only Roland ever seemed interested in this form of decompression, the practice informally becoming the king's escape, while his queen remained comfy cozy in her bubble. She never got over the shock of Calto's invisibility and was fearful of wandering away on her own. Never forgetting to mark his territory, the humbled king always found the way back to his queen's kingdom. While Roland accepted Calto's magic reluctantly, Lisa was willing to embrace all its riches, most especially during green. One in particular starts with a sleepy stroll at new light. The path is different every cycle and takes her down to the central pasture from whichever hillside cave she slumbered in the true night prior. If she rises early enough and isn't too far up the slope, she will reach Calto's floor before dawn. There, she can witness a stunning birth that rivals the best eclipse end. With a panoramic view of the hills and green all around her, she comes to watch Xenix dissolve away the shadows of true night and awaken the gross emerald. But on this particular morning, something new has caught her eye, a cluster of mushrooms growing inside a hollow log. Like most fungus, these organisms prefer dark, damp environments, and Lisa's heavy foot has cracked through some rotted grosswood. Peering into the wound her wolf inflicted, the Andrewsarchus has only crushed a fraction of the ivory toadstools. Marveling at the cream wrapped around her ankle, the queen lingers with temptation. It's too early for food, and her king would caution against eating something mysterious when one isn't actually hungry. But the unfamiliarity of this new jewel is tantalizing, and taking risks is what life is all about. Fear of missing Calto's unveiling hastens her deliberation, and her choice is made. Giving in to her primal urges, she breaks open the log and downs the entire buffet of shrooms, smushed or otherwise. The soggy flesh is bitter, but otherwise unremarkable. The Andrewsarchus leaves the experience underwhelmed, continuing her stroll as if nothing happened. But these mushrooms are of the magic variety, and it will take at least another unit for the queen to appreciate their full effect. Making their way through the queen's digestive system are hunks of Copelandia, a deprecated genus of mushroom only found in Calto. They contain the naturally occurring psychoactive compound psilocybin, which is known to cause hallucinations and euphoria. A magically enigmatic compound, our understanding of how psilocybin triggers these effects has become less and less mysterious. The molecule is known to mimic the action of several neurotransmitters, influencing the matrix of communication pathways between brain regions. This capacity of the drug impacts everything from visual processing and feelings of consciousness to overall mood and behavior. Trips on psilocybin are highly variable, and while not habit-forming or toxic to the body, experiences can stay with the subject for the rest of their life. Variability aside, a consistent feature of psilocybin is ego dissolution, the complete loss of subjective identity. In this state, I becomes we, and the mind is no longer blinded by a selfish perspective. For some, this can bring a sense of jubilation driven by a connection to all things. For others, it can be a waking nightmare brought on by terrifying connectivity. It all depends on set and setting, and right now, Lisa finds herself inside a glossy jade diamond, surrounded by life and light. The queen becomes aware of a situation when the majesty of dawn doesn't fade. The vibrancy of green has no ceiling, and the enchantment is overwhelming. It is as if green is undressing her eyes, Calto taking their virginity with white light. There is a tingling in her stomach, but the lumbering animal doesn't connect it to the Copelandia. Her mind is experiencing reality as it never has, and her body is preoccupied by rolling waves of ecstasy. She is perfectly content where she is, truly self-aware for the first time. Gazing out on the foraging Lystrosaurus, the queen is completely turned off by the prospect of food. Staring down at her subjects with empathy and depth, Lisa's appetite for flesh is replaced by a great debt of gratitude for their service. They make all of Calto's magic possible, and it is they who are the true rulers. A sound unfamiliar redirects the giant hyena's attention, and her oversized head slowly comes about. The queen's eyes are glazed and bloodshot, and she sees two unthinkable creatures glimmer through Calto's entrance. First a head followed by a long neck, then a body followed by a long tail. She has never seen such things before and wonders if she is still dreaming beside King Roland. Huge and walking on four legs, their extended neck is pronged with alarmingly tall spines, and their back and tail have a feisty row of thorns. The noise that caught Lisa's attention is coming from the larger of the two, presumably the male, and appears to be the product of his boned quills rattling together. In awe of Zai's coordinated motion, the queen wears an open-mouthed stare as the behemoths parade past her. Directly in front of her, Lisa can see that the male is not only making noise with his body, but he also has a dazzling vortex trailing behind, his fiercely whipping tail. Sauropods like a Margosaurus were once thought to have a second brain dedicated to controlling their rare appendage. And given the determination of the male's theatrics, one can see why. Still chasing Katie's consent, Zai is performing an elaborate mating ritual, but the female spikeneck is indifferent to his charms. She only wants what the Lystrosaurus are eating, and she doesn't acknowledge her suitor until she settles on a cluster of gloss. Only then does she periodically turn from her feast, her doting eyes blinking with amorous encouragement. A safe distance away, Lisa continues to gawk at the glittering display. To the queen, the Amargasaurus are a messier of color with shades as captivating as their form. The posturing male has a leopard's coat of blue and green rosettes, similar to Thea's peacock gems. When he holds his neck clattering, Lisa is able to see his steel spines. They are white hot and look ferocious, but she only sees them for the reverberating sound they make, which is still radiating above and echoing off the hills. Lowering her eyes to the highway of Zai's neck, she can see the energy of his thoughts propagating from head to tail. They move as rings of light wrapped around his throat as they glide down his body. Expanding over his abdomen, the bands of light contract to cuff the base of his tail, and the signal is finally expressed as a calligraphy of motion. Ghosts of color fill the Amargasaurus's tail wake, and if his show was for her, the queen would gladly ope her lap to Zai's saint-seducing gold. Aroused herself, Lisa is curious to gauge the other female's reaction, and the stoned hyena turns her attention to the second spike neck. Similar to following Zai's cascading thoughts, the psilocybin allows the queen to see sustenance moving through Katie's body. The Amargasaurus's dark maroon and flecks of iridescence rise within her like soda bubbles. It is obviously sustenance boiling in her gut, but the biology here is counterintuitive. These dinosaurs lacked cheeks and molars, so rather than chewing their food, they purposely ingested small stones, known as gastroliths, to do the heavy grinding for them. Lined with finger-pegged teeth, Katie uses her mouth to rake in hot gloss leaves and then swallows the green tongues whole. Watching the glowing mass as it moves through the Amargasaurus's tube throat, Lisa is fascinated by the subtle bulge that carries a cherry bomb punch. When the nourishment finally reaches her belly, Katie's burgundy coat begins to starburst with eclipse and pyrotechnics. Sparks flicker from the abdomen and emanate to every recess of her body. Their color is distinct from the gloss's green hue and more closely resembles Zai's white-hot thoughts. There is no way the queen can understand the ins and outs of the spike neck's ins and outs, but somehow the Copelandia fills the gaps. Well familiar with the orgasmic satisfaction of satiation, the psychedelically empathetic Androusakis pauses for a moment of shared joy. Ready to acquiesce to Zai's advances, the in-season female finally raises her hind and kneels on her front elbows. At first, Lisa is confused by the change in Katie's body language and fails to notice Zai's tail stiffening into an erection of anticipation. The queen eventually recognizes the act of coitus when the male rears on his back legs and balances himself. The queen eventually recognizes the act of coitus when the male rears on his back legs and balances himself against the female's bottom. Continuing to forage on the gloss, Katie's consent is evidenced by her equally capable tail whip cradling Zai as he positions himself. Her support is essential for the 3-ton male and no less intimate a gesture than a tender hand holding a lover by the hair. The sight of conquest punctures Lisa's shared moment of joy and leaves the queen in a state of isolated sadness. She has no ill will for the lovers, but procreation is a sensitive subject for her. Giving the Amatosaurus their due privacy, Lisa turns away before Zai begins pumping his seed. The queen happily accepted such advances from Roland, but their combination of seed and womb has so far been lifeless. Weak genes are an Achilles heel for royalty, and offspring too rich with cousin blood can die before ever taking a breath. It was just this past green that the queen birthed her last still. Like the previous two, it laid inert to her and Roland's touches, but not to Red's. Living a life of leisure, Lisa came to accept that Calto would take her children for its own. Crestfallen, Lisa finds herself looking inward. She feels alone without Roland. He wouldn't have eaten the Copalandia, but he may have been able to protect her from this dark reality. His noble stewardship has always corralled her charming eccentricity, but the Queen's carefree joyride is over. The Crescent Valley may have been her secluded kingdom for a time, but it ultimately belongs to those who can thrive here. Her mind opened by the drugs, the Androusakis sees past her short-term indulgences and realizes the heavy truths mating in front of her. Not only will she never produce an heir, the jade diamond never belonged to her in the first place. Life in Calto is full and enduring, but a single life is fleeting and insignificant. She is a speck of pollen on the wind, and her womb is a barren steppe. Her royal self-image crumbling, she needs Roland to navigate the truth. But the truth is, her king is dead. The lightning crack outside the cave rouses Lisa from her mournful rest. The psilocybin has worn off, but the rain is still falling. It is just past noonlight and her surface wounds have closed. But scarred and shattered on the inside, the queen has no fight left in her and only wishes to flee. If she can get to Brahm's hatch before the remaining wolves find her, she'll be able to escape to the steppe. But then what? Roland is gone and Calto is the only home she knows. The jade diamond had become her insular Tahiti, and without her king, she is left with the horror of a life half known. Running through the sopping bush, the lush of Calto is burdensome in a way Lisa has never experienced. Tongues of gloss heckle the fractured bitch as she surges through the brush, and more than once the queen stumbles into the mud of self-loathing. Shamed but relieved, she arrives at a dark opening behind a silent waterfall. Knowing this darkness is the only way she will ever see light again, she steps into the passage and disappears from Calto forever. Outside the cloak, Lisa can't help but linger. Hovering in wilted denial, she spends the entire first cycle just outside the palace walls. Waiting for Eclipse End to provide a fleeting glimpse into her previous life, she stubbornly holds her position until a flicker of magic blinks a vision she will never see again. Gaping into the blank steppe, her mind fills with the image of Roland's life being taken. A pack of black claws and feathers, those searing red eyes. She pushes the nightmare aside and fixates on Roland's steadying presence. What would my king do? Food. She hasn't eaten since the Copalandia, and nourishment will heal her mind as well as her body. The steppe is bountiful in ways the queen doesn't appreciate, but she soon will. Bushes and small berries are nearby, and she approaches them dubiously. The fruitage is menial, but she is pleasantly surprised by their unfamiliar flavor. Still famished, the queen pulls up the shrub and is hopeful for juicy, creepy crawlers. There are insects in the opened earth, but none as fat as she's accustomed to. Rooting up what she can, she decapitates every bush, covering herself in filth. Lisa knows she must leave Calto's doorstep eventually, but she isn't ready yet. Once she pushes off from the Green Isle, there is no coming back. It will take another lonely true night for her to work up the courage, and in the end it isn't bravery that severs the connection between queen and kingdom, it's thirst. Swallowing her pride with exoskeleton, the queen scavenges like a lone vagrant in the alley of a wicked city. Blinding zeolite overhead tells Lisa she must get going. Out on the step, it doesn't take long for melancholy puddles to dry into pits of dehydration. Only certain about which way she cannot go, the queen begins to trek away from her kingdom and the safety of smells she knows. Breathing in new air, Lisa's mind fills with opportunities. These scents are foreign to the banished empress, but in the unfamiliar static there is a spark of something long forgotten. A unit and a half later, she identifies the source of at least one scent. She has reached a watering hole and a pair of Pachycephalosaurus are drinking nearby. These plant-eating dinosaurs existed during the late Cretaceous, but don't let their food choice allow you to drop your guard. Noticing the newcomer, they look up keenly. Roughly the same mass as Lisa, they stand on two sturdy legs and have a pair of short five-fingered arms. Imposing animals, males are distinguished by a bulbous domed skull, likely used as a battering ram during interspecies combat over mating and territory rights. Lisa pauses and stares back at them cautiously, wary of their weaponed heads. Each crowned ram could devastate her if she tried anything, but hunger is not relevant at the moment, and all Lisa wants is water. Fortunately, the oasis is large enough to avoid confrontation, and the three creatures slurp in peaceful silence. The water is restoring and recharges Lisa's primal instincts. She raises a refreshed mind to the sky and takes in breaths as she takes in Thea, a burned queen herself eclipsing Xenix's glory. Hypnotized by the sun moon's lustrous swirls, the queen's rational mind is silenced, while the molten face beckons to Lisa's hyenic intuition. Closing her eyes, the queen shifts her focus and catches a familiar scent in the air. An old friend, she is delightfully reminded of Roland. It isn't the smell of her king or anything he provided per se, but rather something he always envied of hers. Roland was always better at hunting live animals, but Lisa had a knack for finding dead ones, which was often safer and more useful. Abandoned but not lost, her nose for carrion is exquisite and something is rotting nearby. Despite the close proximity, it takes several units to find the carcass. The steppe is covered with grass and bushes, but it is also sprinkled with gullies and knolls. In one such pocket, a combination of dense vegetation and a dugout lair have concealed a large body, making it difficult to locate. Other than a rotted flesh wound, it is pristine, and Lisa suspects it isn't long dead. The den it rests in is peculiar, with a large mound of earth standing guard just outside, presumably the soil excavated from the burrow. Tired from her stymied search, Lisa has no strength to dwell on hows and whys, and simply ruptures the cadaver's gut. The entrails Lisa is presently devouring belong to a Majungasaurus. This late Cretaceous carnivore was discovered in 1896 and is named after the area it was found, the Mahajong province of northwestern Madagascar. Like Tyrannosaurus, it is a two-legged theropod with essentially vestigial arms, but smaller than T-Rex, it belongs to a different family of predators known as abelisaurids. Comparable at first glance, Tyrannosaurids are of the northern hemisphere and abelisaurids the southern. During their stretch of Earth's history, no continental mass connected them, and as such, these carnivores lived as separately as leopards and jaguars. Standing 8 feet tall and 20 feet long, Majungasaurus was an apex predator with a very unique skull structure. Compact with a short, wide snout, the head of this animal has a large sinus cavity encased by fused nasal bones. This configuration strengthened Majungasaurus' skull and likely supported temperature regulation in Madagascar's arid environment. On top of its head above the eyes is a modest horn. The purpose of this ornamentation is unknown, but it likely existed in both males and females. Computer tomography scans of the bony nub indicate a hollowed structure, suggesting that Majungasaurus' horn was likely used for demonstration rather than combat. In its mouth are 34 teeth that reveal a clue about what Majungasaurus hunted. Unlike T-Rex, whose banana-sized spikes crush through the bones of smaller prey, this killer's teeth are short and flat-backed, resembling a shark's dorsal fin. Perfect for gripping the flesh off struggling prey, these teeth, combined with an incredibly strong neck, would have allowed Majungasaurus to hold on to animals larger than itself. Lisa goes for the darkest tissue first, and the heart, liver, and kidneys are downed quickly. Lungs and deflated fibrous pouches cling to the dead animal's frame, and the queen rips them away like wet sheets off a clothesline. These organs supported Majungasaurus's advanced respiratory system, which is comparable to that of modern birds. An incredible feat of evolution that has persisted for 250 million of your years. These sparse sacs are used to hold air for O2-CO2 gas exchange while the primary lungs continue breathing. Despite being more complex than mammalian lungs, this form of respiration is more effective and prevents the animal from losing its breath. This system provided a selective advantage during the early Triassic period, when global oxygen levels were depleted following the Permian-Triassic extinction event. Having a highly efficient form of O2 extraction enabled dinosaurs to evolve into large, active beasts, while other creatures remained small and helpless, gasping for air. The meal is satisfying, and for a moment, Lisa forgets her loneliness deep within. It is well into true night, and she is exhausted. The steppe air is cold, and the empty cavity of the carcass is inviting. Against her king's better judgment, the queen backs herself into the open torso until she finds a comfortable position. Her head and front legs are naked to the elements, but the queen's hind and spirits are warm. There, resting on the bloody earth, Lisa finds sleep easily. Cocooned in a food coma, Lisa's dreams are mangled and psychedelic, perhaps a consequence of her cadaver bedchamber. The queen's mind is still processing the totality of her circumstances, and the kaleidoscope of emotions can't help but color outside the lines. Whipping tails and slashing talons combined with charging helmets and rotting wounds. Danger is visible but not real. She is safe but all alone. The visions haunt her subconscious, but they are nothing compared to what awaits her woken eyes. Xenix is well in bloom before Lisa begins to stir. She is warm inside the carcass, but that isn't what wakes her. Disturbing the queen's slumber is a symphony of strange sounds that include clicking and cawing. At first, she thinks it is a gang of scavengers and her monopoly of the carrion is over. But when her eyes open, she is amazed to see a hatchling wrestling with some intestines. Pierce is a male and is driven by an instinctual awareness of waste, compelling him to thrash fecal matter out of the sinewy tubing. Captivated by such ferocity in a youngster, the queen's focus is railroaded by the chirp of a second baby Majungasaurus. This one is a female, Lava, and is staring down at the hulking mammal while perched on her cadaver bedchamber. Blood drips from her small thorny jaws, making it clear that she has been pecking at tissue. Neither of the animals pose a threat. Lisa is gigantic by comparison, but the cannibalism is alarming and the queen isn't sure what to do. What she doesn't realize is that Majungasaurus was known to eat its own kind. Fossils of this dominant predator have been found with teeth marks that match Majungasaurus itself. In a remote area like Madagascar, territory battles would occur frequently, and meat from a vanquished opponent is just as good as flesh of hunted prey. In this instance, a mortal wound killed the mother, and the Majungasaurus died guarding her nest, the body left largely intact. Turning from Lava's gawking stare, the queen fixates on the mound of dirt resting outside the burrow. It no longer resembles a sturdy pile of earth, but rather a collapsed souffle with a large gaping hole that is abruptly filled by a third horned infant, Castle. The audacious male screeches and then sprints directly for the Andrewsarchus, its assumed maternal figure. Still cozy in a corpse, however, Lisa can't evade the approaching child, and Castle glides in beside her, using spilled body fluids as lubricant. The enchanted male makes himself comfortable and begins ripping flesh off the insides of his true mother's chest cavity. Satisfied that the three hatchlings wish her no harm, Lisa begins to relax. She extricates herself from the body, mindful of the newborn recently attached to her hip. Both join Lava eating rich neck meat, and the children do their best to model their mother's behavior, picking at bloody nits while she rips off dripping hunks. Bursting from Yestercycle's organ gorge, the queen has limited interest in flesh, dead or otherwise, but the chewing action allows her to contemplate. The peculiarities of the nesting layer now obvious, the Andrewsarchus has a choice to make. Alone on this steppe, she is a queen in exile with only the memories of a better life to keep her company. But to these scrappy gremlins, she's an essential figure, a mother. Her mind absent of Roland and Calto, Lisa watches the infants pick at meat and each other. They have no fear of the mighty hyena, and they love her without knowing why. Cherishing their innocence, a flicker of purity ignites in Lisa's jaded soul. A life of meaning and purpose is within her grasp. Irregular, perhaps, even objectionable to some, but she has always cherished the unfamiliar and well knows that life is all about taking risks. Free from the weight of her grief, the queen makes a decision. Over the next few cycles, the new family is able to bond. The carrion is substantial and well concealed, allowing them to eat in peace. During this time, Lisa's loneliness is replaced by the stresses of motherhood. When they grow restless, brothers and sister are quick to rumble, but it is their primary needs that bring the queen's maternal instincts online. Their bellies are full, but they still need liquid water, and danger is everywhere. When Lisa finally leaves the bushed gully in search of hydration, Pierce, Lava, and Castle eagerly follow. Each hatchling has imprinted the Andrewsarchus as their mother, but their connections to her are mixed. Pierce and Lava are independent and wander ahead, willing to chase sights and scents until they are scared back to mum. Castle is more attached to the queen, however, focused on emulating his mother's behavior. In love with her regal nature, he wouldn't dream of wandering off. The steppe is hot with zeolite, and Lisa wonders if the oasis she previously visited has dried up. She can see a glimmer on the horizon and is relieved to see that the watering hole is vacant. The level is comparable to the last time she was here, so perhaps this isn't an oasis after all, but an enduring pond of some sort. She steps down to the water and dips her mouth into the cool, clear liquid. Each hatchling follows suit, Castle settling between his mother's legs, Pierce and Lava wading in on either side. Huddled together, the foursome drinks in unison. After a few chips, a distant ripple catches Lisa's gaze. She raises her head out of the water and opens her ears. They are alone on the steppe, and there is nothing but silence around them. Castle notices the queen's distraction and coos at her, drawing her furrowed glare downward. Their eyes meet for an intimate moment. Now the noble steward, the queen can't help but see herself in the tiny devil. Captivated by connectivity, the Andrewsarchus lowers its almighty head to reassure the youngling. But before she can complete the calming gesture, the Mother Queen's peripheral vision is filled with an enormous threat. Exploding out of the water is a crocodile-like animal named Ed. A Deinosuchus, his kind existed during the late Cretaceous period and are identical to their modern relatives, except 15 times heavier and 30 feet long. Springing away like a startled horse, the queen separates herself from the massive reptile. And given the Deinosuchus' immense size, the attack is relatively slow, and Lisa is able to evade his snapping jaws. But the colossal lizard is determined, and High walks up the bank after her. Outside the water, Lisa is far too quick for the Deinosuchus, and it isn't long before Ed abandons the pursuit. Still shell-shocked at the water's edge, the babies are easier targets, and the titanic croc whips around. Giddy with the prospect of their vulnerability, Ed playfully charges back to the pond. Relieved for a moment, the queen's mood snaps to alarmed, and she chases after the enormous monster. Activated by the danger, each hatchling braces themselves in a death pose. Pierce and Lava hold a defensive posture while Castle collapses to the ground. Ed is prepared to eat all three at once, but before he can chomp up the infants, the queen is airborne. She sinks her immense mandibles into the alligator's rear left foot, and the crushing insult halts Ed's murderous sprint. The response from the Deinosuchus is immediate, and his billboard-sized tail whacks the queen broadside, sending her sprawling. Ed's demonic head comes around as Lisa returns to her feet. She is stunned and woozy, but her muscular body absorbed the blow, and what follows is a subconscious eruption of hyenic roars. Instinctively hoping to absorb the attacker's attention, the Mother Queen provides a diversion so her children can escape. Lisa's battery of slashing sounds causes the mighty Deinosuchus to hesitate, his mouth opening in a hiss. The queen knows she is no match for the larger predator, but luring Ed into a charge will ensure the hatchling's safety. Wounded and agitated, Ed makes a half-hearted lunge at the Andrewsarchus, which Lisa dodges easily. Frustrated but resigned, the Deinosuchus allows his momentum to carry him back into the water. In an instant, his enormous body is beneath the surface, and once again the steppe is silent.